All right, now we're going to look at divine righteousness and justice and how that relates to the concept of the doctrine of sin. And to begin with, we're roughly on page 2 of the Hamartiology handout. And here, under the heading Types of Divine Righteousness, we start with the concepts of internal and external righteousness. Internal righteousness is really what we call divine holiness, okay? Divine holiness, as it's say here, can be divided into two parts, which is positive holiness and negative holiness. Positive holiness is probably the part you don't hear often enough. If you hear a sermon or a message on holiness, you'll probably hear something like holiness means being separated from sin. Right? That's the negative aspect of holiness. The positive aspect of holiness is that you have an essential inclination to goodness, kindness, love, and you could throw a lot of other things in there, righteousness. But that's the positive idea of holiness, is your constancy and inclination to those things as opposed to something else. Now, if you're inclined to those things, the negative side is you're going to separate from things that are not good and good and righteous and loving and all of that. So when we talk about the internal righteousness of God, what we're really talking about is the divine attribute, which is constant and immutable and unchangeable. So God is holy, and he will always be holy, and he will always be in some way or form separate from sin, okay? And we'll explain more on that as we go through the course. But what's important now for us as creatures, okay, as people or human beings made in the image of God, with the law written on our heart, our conscience bearing witness, with the express law of God given to us in Scripture, the fact is with our changeability or mutability and the fact that we're limited, is that, yes, God wrote the law in our heart. The problem is day by day, moment by moment, you're gaining knowledge, and you are putting some kind of value and truth value on every proposition and every idea that you acquire. Is this the right thing to do, or is this the right thing to do? And eventually you're going to have a hierarchy of beliefs that you think are right or wrong, and that you think are, quote, the best thing to do in a possible situation. Our problem is that we can get that right or we can get that wrong. And if we value the wrong thing by our false deliberations or deliberation about things that don't actually correspond to reality, you're going to have appetites for the wrong thing and then choose the wrong things and hence enter into sin. So that's why we think about the righteousness of God. God gave us a standard. So the external righteousness of God is simply what? God's standard of holiness declared outside of himself. So, in other words, the law of God is simply God's holiness or righteousness declared in the creation or external world. And there's a one-to-one correspondence between what God has declared to us in external righteousness to what God finds righteous in his own attribute of holiness and righteousness. So this is significant because, again, here when we think about this is what is called the law of God, okay? And so, in other words, this is how you should order your life. Now, all this comes down to, you're like, okay, be holy, be righteous, that's great, but how do we be holy and righteous in every particular situation? See, that's a great general principle, be holy, but it has to be applied. I mean, in every moment and every aspect of our life. So that's why eventually we see this idea of being holy being explained in various propositions and in the various specific laws of God, which we'll get to in a minute. We'll look at the concept in the Ten Commandments and what that means, even in more general senses of law, but also the law written on the heart. So here it's, we think about external righteousness. We've got a couple of categories we have to distinguish, okay? And for the categories here, we're going to start with very similar to when we talked about divine omniscience, the idea that there's an antecedent and a consequent to something. Antecedent means something that comes before, consequent, something that comes after. So remember, with divine omniscience, natural knowledge was antecedent knowledge. Why? Because it comes before the divine choice. Consequent knowledge comes after the divine choice. Okay? So natural knowledge, here's all the possible worlds God could make. God makes a choice to enact one of those possible worlds. So the resulting free or consequent knowledge of God is what God decided will actually come to pass. Well, when we look at the righteousness, as far as external righteousness for human beings, same kind of division. There's antecedent and consequence. Very important. Antecedent is the declaration or notice that God gives us of the standards. Okay? And this is significant as can be, because when we think about concepts of fairness, nobody should be blamed for violating a law that they didn't know about. Okay? And so this is actually in the legal world, this is a very important concept, the very concept of notice being given for something. Because again, if you shouldn't be found to be guilty or liable for violating a law you had no possible way of knowing. Well, God sort of accomplished that notice with the fact that He wrote the law in our hearts, our conscience bearing witness. So we have innate knowledge of, it's wrong to murder, it's wrong to rape, it's wrong to steal, it's wrong to covet. Why? Because when people do it to us, guess what? We recognize that principle. It's written in our hearts. But so for antecedent, righteousness and notice, it's just a little legal principle here, is that you have basically what's called imputed notice rather than actual notice of every law when you enter a jurisdiction. Like we're in the state of California. When you cross the border from Nevada or Arizona and you come into the state of California, guess what? You are imputed with knowledge of every law that the state of California has ever passed and put on the law book. See, it's not the government's job to come and inform you of the thousands of laws. It's your job to know the law. So if you violate any of it, you have this imputed notice rather than, now we have actual notice of a lot of the laws, but guess what? You have imputed notice of all the other laws as well. Same thing with the federal government. You get off that airplane from Pakistan or you cross the border from Canada, you are imputed with knowledge. You have imputed knowledge or notice of every law, every federal law pertaining to your existence and living your life in the United States. So that's the difference between actual notice and then again, some type of imputed notice. But what's important here that we have actual notice of every requirement that God has, because why? He wrote it on our hearts. We know what we're supposed to do, and our conscience bears witness of that. So that's what we call antecedent, righteousness. So law, the declaration of the way things ought to be, is antecedent or legislative righteousness. And God writes it on our heart, plus all through the Bible, God tells us what we should be doing and what we shouldn't be doing. But now, here's the thing. Now you know what you should and shouldn't be doing, and now you have to do what? Make choices. So after that, many Christians follow Aristotle's divisions on righteousness and justice, and really the very concept of universal righteousness, is really the idea of being a just person, what we might call, eretic ethics or virtue ethics. What does it mean to be a just person, have these inclinations? And then dividing up law and justice into antecedent and consequent. Now, consequent, there are many types of ways of justice. Bottom line, as we'll see with the concept of justice, both now and in our written discussions on Canvas, is that we're going to see that justice, very importantly, is owed to people. If you obey the law, see, there is a particular consequence for that, and we call that remunerative justice. If you follow the standard, then you receive, based on your choice and action, a particular reward or remuneration. If you disobey the law, then, and you choose to do that, then you end up with particular retributive justice for disobeying the law. So the particular remunerative justice or particular, retributive justice, and again, it's particular because it looks at each individual act of obedience or disobedience. So, and on that point, you either get reward or punishment. And so let me give you some examples of this before we go into sort of specific overviews of what the standards are, is this. We look at, for example, of remunerative justice. So you can raise your hand, I won't see you, but how many of you have a job and earn a paycheck, right? Okay, yeah, there you go, raise your hand. All right, so you go to work, you work your 40 hours, and then at the end of the 40 hours or whatever your pay period is, then your employer gives you a gift of your paycheck, right? Yeah, wrong, okay? No, that's owed to you. That is particular distributive, economic, remunerative justice. It is owed to you. And so because you followed the agreement, and again, we can do a lot on the concept of law as it relates to sin, which, by the way, I have a whole other course on the concept of theology of civil government, biblical views of law as they relate to civil government. Here, just going to do as brief an overview as we can possibly do. But the very notion, for example, of positive rights and covenants that we make. You have a covenant with your employer. It doesn't violate the law of God. You do this work. You're paid this. Now there is a specific responsibility. There is remunerative justice that is owed to you for obeying your part of the covenant. Okay? So again, that's an example of remunerative justice. In negative rights, a lot of what have to do with criminal law. See now, the right to life. Leave other people alone. Don't murder them. Okay, now you commit an act of murder. Now what's owed to you? Eye for eye, tooth for tooth, life for life. If you shed man's blood, by man your blood will be shed because it's in the image of God. Now you owe a debt of a life that's in the value of someone in the image of God. So how do you pay that? And the answer is you give your own life. So even though methodologically and procedurally there are sometimes good reasons to commute the sin, to reduce it, to grant pardons, to do things like that, the fact is that is strict proportional retributive justice. Life for life, the value of a human life for a human life. Okay, which, by the way, capital punishment actually upholds the value of human life because it says there's no anything else that can be given to satisfy the value of what you intentionally took, which was immoral and illegal. So anyway, that's the concept, again, of antecedent or legislative righteousness, and then consequent or particular justice, okay, or consequent righteousness, which is known as particular justice. So in the next segment, I'm going to start looking at the particular laws of God and how to really think through those concepts. Thanks.